Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, Chris Coulson. Chris is an online fitness coach, veteran of the U.S. Navy, gamer, and all-around self-proclaimed nerd who has trained several celebrities and professional athletes. And one of the things that makes Chris quite unique is that he has both ADHD and autism, and he shares how this neurodivergent combination has been both a challenge and superpower for him. As I mentioned, Chris is an avid gamer like myself, and we share over our mutual love for games. And as someone with autism who can often experience the world's myriad unwritten rules as confusing, Chris shares how games have been a way for him to escape into a world where the rules are clear. We also dive deep into his personal experiences dealing with depression, which have provided an eye-opening look at how debilitating that experience can truly be, and how it's quite different from how we often talk about it. We also give valuable advice on how to support friends and loved ones who may also suffer with clinical depression. And throughout our conversation, Chris provides a deeper understanding of the challenges and benefits that come with being neurodivergent, as well as the importance of support and understanding for those who may experience the world differently from you or I. So without further ado, let's dive into getting to know Chris Coulson. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So yeah, we were just talking a minute ago, and I was just saying that one of the things that I really enjoyed about you and kind of what drew me to you in the first place was you're this, you're a successful online fitness instructor, fitness coach, however you want to describe that. And one of the things that like really drew me to you was your kind of expression and love for video games, which is something that you don't really see. It's like, I feel like often in the entrepreneurial space, there's always this stuff of like, oh, like basically unless you're, breathing and living work, and then only thing you're doing is like maybe drinking or partying on the weekends, you're kind of like low on life. And I fell back in love with video games through COVID, and it was really refreshing to see your take. And yeah, I was just wondering, I guess, how and why have like video games been so important to you in your own life?
That is an excellent question. And it's not something that I think I explore very often because I just accept it as this is a thing that I enjoy, therefore I will do it. But as far as why it's important, I think it has a lot to do just like being able to look back on my life and knowing what I was going through and why I always searched for video games. I think that it has a lot to do with escapism and as a vehicle for me to be able to express myself through areas that felt just very fun and free and safe without any restrictions or any kind of real world pressures or any kind of shackles, if you will, of the human brain and the reality that we live in.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, I think that's been a big thing for me, even thinking it over the last period of my life is like my parents like fought all the time. And when thinking about it, like video games are my way of like kind of zoning out of that
Yeah.
reality, and being able to be in something else. One of the things you just mentioned was this ability to find like your own sort of creative self-expression in that space without any shackles. I think you mentioned. Like, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, how did you find you were able to kind of express yourself in video games that you couldn't in the normal world?
Yeah. So I guess playing video games was probably the only time, other than reading a book or some other kind of vehicle for existing again in a place that I didn't actually exist in. Doing that through video games was very. How do I answer this question? It was a way for me to feel what it was like to play in a world where I didn't feel like I had to act a specific way other than obviously through the controls of the video game controller, but minus that, it was very freeing to be able to do and interact with worlds and characters or whatnot in this place that was less like a little playground, that I can go in and basically do whatever I want. And that more than anything, that freedom was what allowed whatever kind of creativity you were able to use in a video game like that really fostered it there. Yeah.
That's cool. So, did you find that was there sort of like almost like a reverse benefit, like where kind of by finding this freedom within within the video games, it like kind of bled back into your normal life and reality as well, or was it kind of just like a pure escapism kind of component?
It was definitely a pure escapism. I don't feel like there was any kind of anything that I was able to pull from my experience playing video games that I was able to use in the real world. And I think that has a lot to do with just looking back at it now, just like my just being autistic and not knowing what that is, or that I had it, and just trying to exist already in a place that I don't understand, which is like the real world and how that it operates. So
Yeah.
I never felt creatively free to be to exist and kind of interact in the real world. So there was a place in that in the digital world that I could do that, and
Mhm.
and that was very much like a binary kind of relationship like that.
Got it. So it was like very much like you had like the reality that was difficult and you had to play certain games or live by certain rules. And then you had this other reality where you could really kind of be whoever you wanted to be.
Yeah, and the rules were clear in video games because like here are the
Mm,
things that you can do, and this is how you can interact, and other than that, have fun. Whereas
yeah.
here, it's much more ambiguous, and that doesn't really work for me.
Yeah. 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 Can you say more about that? Like how, because I know you just mentioned like your autism and dealing with that. And I know that's something you came into awareness of later in your life. Um, is that like the desire for rules and that kind of main structure, knowing clarity on kind of what the rules of the game are? Is that like a big component for you with regards to your autism and how that shows up for you?
A desire for clarity is a big component of it, right? So not really understanding like social conventions and why they exist because there's no book of rules on here's how this thing should work. It really kind of hampers my ability to both enjoy and exist in it in a way that's not me like checking back on the basically, all right, I've created these rules after existing in society and how people have interact, so I have to like constantly reference that and use that to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I'm doing the correct thing that humans do when they interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of and it's very variable, like in certain situations you do this and other ones you do this, and it's not very it's not very clear, whereas in video games it's often very clear. It's like, here's how you do this thing, and then you go do the thing, and it's like, oh, that's so that's so refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally relate to that. I think one of the things that was that's always been a bit of a challenge for me as well in a different way where like I grew up super religious and Christian, so I had my rules, right? I had like the Bible literally that was like, this is what
Yeah.
you do, this is what you don't do, this is how you interact. And just like I'll give the example for dating, for example, like I grew up in like purity culture, and so like in my church, by the time I was in high school, the vast majority of the high schoolers that I was with were basically like, oh, we're not even going to kiss until we're married. Like it was like that level of like we're not going to do anything.
Wow.
And the way that they saw that was like kind of this barrier. It's like if we make it so that we won't even kiss, then we'll definitely like not have sex. Was kind of the thought process. Although there was one couple at least that I know of that like literally just didn't kiss until then, which was still pretty wild to me. So I went from
That's
that to
ridiculous.
yeah, and then going to like kind of a more secular, a little bit more open like Christian school, and then getting into the secular world. It was like when it came to dating, I was just like completely no idea what was going on, don't know what the rules are, don't know any of that kind of stuff happens, and it was mind-boggling to me. And it can still be a challenge because it's like one social setting can feel this way, one social setting can feel that way. And I distinctly remember being working in one restaurant environment where everybody was super flirty, people would hook up a lot, there was a lot of partying and stuff afterwards, and then going to another restaurant, and it was like I was like kind of bringing in those same social structures and like flirting and that kind of thing. And it was immediately like, don't do this. This is not okay. And I was like, oh, okay, got it. Clearly I'm in a different world now. I don't understand. There was no instructions, but all right,
Yeah.
I'll trust that. So yeah, I relate to that.
Yep.
I guess I'm curious with kind of needing those rules and instructions. You, at least from my vantage point, have a really solid group of friends and relationships, and you do go out. And I know that like going out, you've expressed can be really really stressful for you. Still, have you found a way to honestly like create your own rules for social interactions that are like regardless of kind of what the larger construct is you have like your own set of guidelines that you're going to follow regardless?
Yeah, it's essentially something that I kind of came to relatively recently. I know after getting out of the Navy and like entering society again as an adult, I kind of had to explore a lot of the social interactions and try to figure all that shit out. And eventually I remember like getting to a point where like, I'm just not going to figure any of this out. And I'm just going to be who I am in these settings, and it'll figure itself out. And that's basically how I've approached things since then. And it's just like, I'm just going to exist as I exist, and the rest of the people around me can figure it out.
Yeah. I'm curious with that choice, because that's something that honestly I still can struggle with, like just really being like, okay, cool, I'm going to be like myself and feel okay with that. Was that something that you honestly build like an inner level of like resilience and confidence over time, or is that something like as soon as you made that decision, you were like, oh, cool, it's easy to be Chris, and I'm just going to do that, and it was just kind of a binary decision?
That's a good question. It's not something that's always very easy because I'm very aware of how, what's a good word for it? It can be very, I can feel like an asshole to a lot of people because of how direct just like being me is. And I'm very aware of that. And it's not something that I feel like I am, or it's not something that I feel like I want to be known as. So it's something that I'm aware of, and it's something that I'm always trying to fine tune a way to be me, and also to exist in just like a social convention that most people would like kind of accept, be like, oh, that's relatively like normal, and how people exist in this setting. So I'm trying to like fine tune it and figure out what that means for me. But it's very easy for me to be me. And I've never had, that's not true. So it's not that I've never had an issue with it. It's just I got to the point where I was so fed up with trying to be all these other things that I just stopped doing those things. And that was a really easy choice.
Got it. And that was particular when you're coming out of the Navy?
Yeah, because it was just like I was the Navy. While it was very hard for me in one sense, it was also very easy because there was such a ton of structure around every interaction. But in like when I got out of the Navy and then I was like thrust into the throes of New York, that's totally different and wildly chaotic, and that was just very hard to navigate. And yeah, it got to a point where I got so overwhelmed and burnt out with trying to figure out all of the intricacies of it that I just stopped.
Yeah, got it. And I've never been to New York, but I can imagine
it's a lot.
The chaos of that place compared to the Navy is quite the opposite. Is there a reason that you moved to New York right after the Navy, or are you from there?
Yeah, there was basically for when I got out of the Navy and was going to do the job that I do now. There was basically an internship opportunity that happened to be in New York. I wasn't beholden to any city specifically, so I was just like, yeah, I'll just go there, and that's where I did.
Got it.
You're wearing a video game shirt right now.
Yeah, that's funny. I feel like you're wearing a video game shirt like 50%
kind of constantly.
Of the time, yeah. I need to get more shirts from you and find other things I can wear. You always have really cool. You have cool video game clothing. It's not just like lame video game clothing.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what that means, but I wear what I like to wear, and I guess it happens to be visually pleasing, which is good.
Yeah. I think one of the things I wanted to ask is a kind of a follow up to sort of the general idea of like figuring out those rules, or like finding that balance. Is like, do you have any like specific examples or things that you have like identified, or little rules that you found for yourself that allow you to be you, but maybe not in the way, like you said, you're maybe perceived as being mean or whatever it might be?
No, but what it has allowed me to do is just kind of over time become more empathetic. Isn't correct, but I'm able to view other people's experiences of what and how I am acting a little bit clearer, and like specifically on how they're perceiving it, and not necessarily how I feel like that I'm being. So that's allowing me a little bit more awareness around that. But But I'm gonna be, yeah, but honestly, like I'm very firm and like I'm just going to show up as how I'm going to show up, and so like
Yeah.
as much as I am trying to fit the situation, I also like honestly, it's really hard for me to care for the most part. The biggest thing
Hmm.
for me when I go out is that whatever reason that I'm going out to do that thing specifically. So whether
Mm.
it's going to celebrate a friend's birthday or like whatever that specific event is, that's what I'm doing. And I
Mm.
do not care about anything else other than showing up specifically to do that one thing.
Mm. Can you give an example of what that like might look like? Like, I guess maybe see if I'm gonna see if this works if I go around here on this. So it's almost like from the opposite angle, like would it look like somebody else would maybe show up to go to a friend's birthday to like network with somebody else? Is that kind of the dichotomy that you're
Yeah,
not
or like
doing?
go to a birthday party and like go or like that person would go to a birthday party and hang out with a bunch of other people and just like be kind of like a social butterfly around
Hmm.
and enjoy the things, leave early, go do all these things. And like when I'm going to a person's birthday, I'm going to make sure that they're having the birthday that they want to have.
Mm.
And even if I don't enjoy the specific thing that I'm doing, that doesn't really concern me. Like I don't care about
Mm.
that. I'm just going to make sure because what I value is my friend having a good birthday and
Yeah.
whatever that means.
Huh.
So I might not always have a good time doing the thing that I'm doing, but I will always have the good
Mhm.
time celebrating the birthday.
That's awesome. I really like that. I think it's like almost like a cool objective because yeah, just I feel like it's like you're able to almost have this like clear, concise goal within a larger crazy experience that allows you to just like pull through. And I found that even with something like festivals, for example, that's something that allows me to have a really good time in a similar way. Not necessarily be like, oh, I'm going out here to celebrate this person or that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Although it could be that, but a lot of times it's just having like some sort of clear intention that I want for myself or to experience in some way, and just kind of like anchoring into that and like letting that make all my decisions for me versus it being like, oh well, I don't know what to do, and now there's like 50 things. I go to this concert, I could hang out with this person or whatever it is, and just following that sort of intention allows it to be easier, and I'm able to kind of get lost more in the moment and actually have a good time.
Yeah, yeah. It's really about like the word that you used was having that anger, and that is
Mm.
something that I'm really good at figuring out for me, and not
Yeah,
really like to the exclusivity of anything else that's happening around me. Like I just don't care about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's awesome. And honestly, like one of the things I want to mention like about your directness is I always find that that's actually one of the things that I think it drew me to you, and I think draws a lot of people to you because it is sort of, in our world, it's, a lot of people tend to be a lot more careful, I would say, with their words, or are less direct, right? And there can be a lot of confusion and that kind of thing. Whereas, like with Chris, it's like, oh, like I know who Chris is and I know what he stands on and I know what he believes and he thinks. But there's also this level of like your ability to tell someone that they're doing something stupid or you think something's dumb without, like, at least from my end, like it will affect me, but doesn't like hurt my feelings. Like I'm like, oh, Chris doesn't think I'm like a bad person, but you will be like, no, that thing is stupid or this person is dumb or whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah. I do that. I do that a lot, and I I often ask my friends about like what is their experience of me
Mm.
in those situations because like I just have no idea, right? Because I just know
Hmm.
how I'm being and I know how it can
Yeah.
be perceived by some people, but it's very much like you said, it's very much you're direct but not in a mean way, right? So it's like I'm not
Hmm.
making fun of or telling somebody that they as a human being are a piece of shit. Is like but the thing that you're doing is really fucking dumb.
Mm.
And I explain it in a way or I say it in a way that's very like here's what you're doing and like why are you doing this thing this way, like what if you
Yeah.
did this thing this way instead,
Hmm.
so you stop doing the thing that you don't want to be doing anymore, right? And like
Yeah.
that's and I but again I say it very directly and I ask super direct and and sometimes cutting questions to get it out of people, but it works.
Yeah. No, no, I think it's been awesome. I mean, I have you right now as my fitness coach, and it's been one of the things that I really enjoy about you is like if I'm spiraling off in my head about something where I think like a lot of people or coaches might be like, oh, well, like, and ask them a question like to get me to evoke some idea or, whatever. You're like, that idea is dumb. Like, stop talking to yourself like that, or stop thinking this way, or whatever it might be. And it's like, oh, okay. And my brain kind of just is like stops, and you're like, oh yeah, you're right. And then it like shifts, and it's a lot easier than, I don't know, having to do a bunch of guesswork or figure out what I'm supposed to maybe be gleaning from the moment or whatnot.
Yeah, well, in that situation, you don't know what you don't know, and like when you're
Mm-hmm.
very much in whatever thing that you're in, and it always seems like a lot, and it always seems hard, and it always seems like it's impossible to do a thing. But often there's a really, really simple solution to anything that you're going through, and that goes for basically everybody in the world. It doesn't mean you can see it, and that doesn't mean that it's easy, but it generally is usually very simple, and it's something that I have. Seemingly a unique ability to both point out and show people what that other option or solution to that thing is. Yeah.
How did you end up as a fitness coach? And before I get to like you answer that question directly, like part of what I'm curious about is you. There's almost to me like an interesting irony in the fact that randomness and chaos is challenging for you, and yet sort of the path that you chose is like, I'm going to become a business owner and have this online coaching industry, which at least from the outside it seems like, owning a business or being an entrepreneur, that kind of thing, is a lot more chaos than like going and getting a job where you have instructions and structure and somebody else is kind of creating that for you, and instead you're having to create that for yourself. So what led you to that? Have you navigated that?
There's an interesting dichotomy with having both ADHD and autism in that they're very polar opposites in a lot of ways. With ADHD, chaos is very enjoyable. It's amazing. It's kind of what you crave, the constant novelty and variety. With autism, that's basically your hell. So I'm always kind of like in this place where I'm very much pulling at two parts of me, and they're very much in contention a lot. Owning a business is like that. So there's a lot of things that I'm very good at, and there's a lot of things that I'm very, very bad at with as far as being a business owner. But as far as coming to the job that I'm doing now, one thing that I found is that I'm not very good at listening to other people explain how they want me to do things, especially if there's better ways to do it. And I know that there's a better way to do it. Then I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it. That doesn't work for people if they're your boss. So I came to quickly find out that I don't work well if I have a boss. And so I didn't really have too many options as far as that. I'm a really good coach and I'm not a really good employee.
Got it. And how did you? So, if I understand your story correctly, you were graduating high school, then went straight into the Navy, and then from there you went to the internship with in New York.
Yeah, kind of. So I was in high school. I had good grades. It was like I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, and I had no idea what I wanted to do for college. So I did like a year of community college, and I was like, "This is a waste of my fucking time," because I still have no idea what I want to do. So I basically sat there one day. I was like, "What's the most opposite thing I could be doing right now?" And that was joining the military. And so I picked the one that I probably wasn't going to get shot at or get stuck in the middle of the country somewhere on an Air Force base, and that was the Navy. I stayed there for 10 years, 4 of which was fine. The other 6 was not. And then while I was in the Navy, I just kind of got introduced and sort of fell in love with fitness. And I found I was really, really good at helping other people achieve their kind of fitness things that they wanted to do and kind of guide them through that and support them. And so that's what I wanted to do. And I was lucky enough to be able to have a good relationship with the people that I used as coaches. And that afforded me the internship opportunity out of the Navy, and kind of just hopped on that, and kind of everything kind of fell into place a little bit as far as the next 6-7 years. I have no how long have I been out of the Navy now? 8 years almost. Yeah, 8 years
So
almost.
you still spent more time in the Navy as an adult at this point than you have outside of the Navy.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was that like? I mean, I've never been in any sort of military service before, and I didn't realize you were there for 10 years. From my head, it was like 4 years or something like that tops. I didn't realize it was a decade, which is a long, long ass time.
It's a long
What
time.
was that? What was that like for you?
I don't really know how to answer that question because it was a lot of things,
Hmm.
but most of it was very simple, but it was really fucking stupid a lot of times.
Hmm.
And often, the thing that I remember the most about being in the Navy is how many arguments I got in with people that were above me on the chain of command,
Hmm.
and how right I was in all of those arguments. And that's basically what I remember the most,
Hmm.
because they would get mad at me, but they couldn't do anything to me about it because I was always correct.
Hmm.
And yeah, so there was a lot of contention and conflict when I was, especially as I got promoted, because then there was even less that they could do to me and more that I could say. And I was not very good at holding my tongue. and,
Sounds like
and
it.
so often I would say things in the most inopportune for them time to say those things. Yeah, and luckily it didn't get me in any actual trouble, just some getting yelled at sometimes. But
Hmm.
that was basically the entirety of my experience, was not wanting to be there for often like periods of time, knowing that I was correct and everybody around me was mostly stupid, and just having to live with the fact that that's just how I had to be.
Hmm.
Yeah, so like I don't remember. It's not that I don't remember. I refuse to let go of a lot of the times that were hard in the Navy, because I find that
Hmm.
people that get out of the military have a very rosy and paint a very rosy picture of what it was and what it could be. And
Hmm.
I wanted to make sure that I never did that. There were some like very good and fun times, but
Hmm.
often it's a place like full of fucking idiots, and you just had to
Yeah.
live in it. And especially like in the Navy, you're like confined to a ship and out at sea for months at a time, and just
Yeah.
living with a lot of idiots.
Was that I would say like the main hard thing was just kind of being surrounded, per your words, by a bunch of idiots, or were there like specific things that like, or
There was a
specific
lot of
moments?
hard things. It's really hard to explain. The being in the military is a very unique experience in that you're asked to do a lot of things kind of all the time, but there's also a lot of times when you're just doing absolutely nothing, but you still like just
Hmm.
have to be there. And it's really, I can't really describe what it's like, because it's such a singular, like unique experience. But
Hmm.
the hardest thing to do was, one, just like be in the military and then just be confined to a ship for months at a time in like a rack that's no bigger than like a single size bed,
Hmm.
with like this much overhead between my bed and the bunk above me, and just like sleeping in rooms with like 50 to 200 other people, and just like
Wow.
living like that for months at a time.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds
But
quite the the not fun summer camp, I guess.
no, but
That's
like the human brain is interesting in that it's easy. It can adapt to anything, even if it's the worst. So
yeah,
like it's easily adaptable. Like it wasn't so bad that I couldn't stay in it for 10 years, right? So it's very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. No, that is super interesting. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but you mentioned there was also, obviously some really good things that came out of it. What were some of the lessons that you learned, or things that being in the Navy taught you that are still a part of your life today, or that kind of thing?
The thing that the Navy taught me most was how not to treat people, because it gave me a very clear like viewership on how like people abuse power,
Hmm.
and what that looks like. So that's what the Navy taught me the most, was really how not to treat people, and how not to be a leader.
Hmm.
As far as like the fun times, there's just like, again, there's a lot of unique experiences. So you get very very close with the people that you're kind of working with, because they're like the only
Hmm.
people you see for years,
Yeah.
and you basically live with these people for years as well. So like there's a lot of there's nothing like shared suffering to really bring people together. And
Hmm.
so just like the intimacy that is there is unique, and the closeness that you can get with some people is unique, but also the Navy creates a lot of barriers to that too. So it's just a very interesting way to live. So like I don't have a ton of really, really close friends from the Navy,
Hmm.
but there's like 4 or 5 that are and like will probably forever be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, such a weird experience.
Yeah, man. Cool. Thanks for sharing. And so from there, after the military, at some point, so when did you start getting into the fitness world? Is that way, like halfway through your experience there? Is it like near the end as you're kind of getting ready to leave, or?
So probably around the second or third year that I was in the Navy is when I really started to get into it, because I had an idea that I wanted to train for what was it? EOD, which is explosive ordnance disposal. And it sounded like a really cool job. I wanted to mess with wires. And I was doing that until I tore my meniscus and ACL
Ah,
and trying to like recover from that, and just like relatively not good support systems that the military has for injuries like that, and just kind of like dealing with that is really what drove me to learn about fitness and how to figure out my own recovery and make sure that was good.
got it. So from there, you started like building up your own kind of like fitness knowledge and your awareness of the body and all
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. And then, so then
because somebody
from
had
there,
to, and it wasn't going to be the people taking care of me.
fair enough, fair enough. And then so from there, you get this internship and you go to New York, and then yeah, and then what? So then you study under them, and then kind of at some point you just decide to launch your own thing.
um, yeah, it was very much like the point of the internship was to learn the kind of online business side of fitness, and just gain more knowledge as far as like how that is supposed to operate.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I learned that a little bit, then got a job at an actual like brick and mortar gym in New York to just like get more experience, just like actually training real people. I did that for a couple years, and then while I was doing that, that's when I started to do my own, like kind of launch my own program, but like very loosely, because I was making just enough money like training people in person to where I didn't have to try very hard to make money online.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't. And at that time, I was in like a fitness mastermind thing with my best friend John Romanello, who ran
Mm-hmm.
it at the time, and I was really good at not paying attention to a lot of the speakers. That's really what I remember most about that, until COVID hit, and then I was like, oh, I guess I have to learn how to do this shit online like really quickly.
Mm,
And
yeah,
that's when I kind of fully dove in on the online business side of things. So that's only been like, I guess, like 3 years now,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's weird. I feel like COVID, it feels like there's this black hole in my like timeline where it's like, oh yeah, like I moved up to Seattle and then like nothing happened. And then all of a sudden life started happening again. But there was like 3 years that went by during that time simultaneously.
Yeah, but that was like, it's interesting. People's COVID experience are interesting to me because it's not unlike my experience in the Navy. So it's like it
Mm,
was not that much different. I'm
yeah.
confined to a place and I don't do things all day. So that's the exact same.
Yeah. And you're not stuck in a tiny single bed with an inch of
Yeah, it was,
space
if
divided.
anything, it was better.
Right.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I'm down for this. I got this.
Yeah, this is really easy, guys. I don't know what you're talking about.
We interrupt this podcast for a quick request. One, if you're enjoying this podcast, please click the subscribe button below. It would mean the absolute world for me. And if you like these kinds of guests, these types of conversations, it makes it easier for you to continue to get these types of videos. Really, really helps the channel out, and I appreciate it a ton. Two, if you really, really like the podcast, please share this with somebody. Share it via whatever method works for you. You can find this on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else you can get a podcast. And three, if you have any questions, feedback, comments, ideas, etc., please hit me up on either Instagram or drop some comments in the comment box below. It really helps me out, really helps out the podcast and everything else that I'm doing. And without further ado, we are back to the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing very well with COVID and being in lockdown for the most part for the first like year, like a couple months,
Yeah.
mostly because I hadn't really played video games for like a really long time,
So you
and
got to
then
do that.
Yeah, and then I literally ended up buying like a PlayStation 4 because I saw Final Fantasy VII Remake was coming out, and it was like right before COVID was happening, and it was just kind of perfect. I played a ridiculous amount of video games in that year. You know, yeah. Are there any, I guess, particular kinds of games that you really like and enjoy?
I really like RPGs, like almost specifically. So anything that I get to build a character, immerse myself into a world, and explore that is usually right up my alley.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's about it. If I have a party, cool. If it's a single person RPG, cool. But any kind of role playing game in which you level up and gain experience and
Mm-hmm.
devote that to points and build the person the kind of the way that you want to is it's always up my alley.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. I'm very much the same way. I think we first connected when we were both playing Elden Ring, when that
Yeah,
guy came out, and that was some great times.
what a fun, unique experience that Elden Ring was.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's still there. I rarely get done with a game and I'm like, oh, I really want to like replay that. Like, I want to go in and like with a different type of character or build and
Yeah,
like explore what this different experience is like. Because I don't know for what you chose, but I was like a mage or an astrologer. So like all my spells, I have like you only have like 15 spells in the game, or like in 5 that are actually useful.
mm-hmm.
And so it's like you're kind of doing a lot of the same stuff. And I'm like, oh, there's these like black, blood blades and these other guys who are dancing around, or these huge builds, or these guys who bounce like this magic and whatever kind of stuff. And yeah, it's just a fascinating ride. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? What
I did a little bit of a mix. So I was like a faith and strength build. So I was using a large two-handed weapon and using faith spells. So like
yeah.
I'm really into lightning spells, and those are all faith spells. So like I
Okay.
used that a lot. That was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, there's even like a couple posts I think that you did that honestly like made me enjoy my own Elden Ring experience more. I think it was like something you made some like comments kind of dishing on people who are all obsessed with like maxing out their stats or having like a perfect build or that kind of thing. And you were like, everybody's worried about this. I'm just going to be like a moonlight warrior or something of that nature, and just like enjoy like my story. And I was like, yeah, that's like how you should be playing a game, like just to come here and like enjoy it. And I think so often, I don't know if it's the way I was raised or whatever, but I can end up getting like so focused on uh, having the perfect thing or doing it right or whatever it might be, and forget to enjoy it. And I think that's such a beautiful part about games. You kind of touched on earlier, but just being able to get to that place where you can just do something for fun and have it be that
Yeah.
fun at the end.
And I think it's really easy to lose sight of why you're playing video games and for the enjoyment of it,
Mm-hmm.
because it becomes like a task, right? Especially when
Mm-hmm.
your time becomes more constrained, then it's like, well, I only have this amount of time to do this thing. So I want to be as efficient with it as possible. And like understanding like that's not the point, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what you have to really, that's what I think a lot of people have to stop doing with video games, is really looking to expedite the experience. Because like, why the fuck are you playing then? Like,
Mm.
just
Yeah.
relax. Just relax. There's no
Yeah.
real time limit. You don't have to play hundreds of games a year. Like just
Mm-hmm.
play like 4 games a year. Like what does it
Yeah.
matter? Like, that's
Yeah.
yeah. That's yeah. It's something that like I also lost sight of too, because I wanted to consume video games as like an escape when I
Mm-hmm.
was going through a lot of depression.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to break that habit again now that I remembered, kind of like why I was doing this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel yeah. Like that's something that I can deal with too, where there's a part, especially as I feel like now because there are there's a balance. On one hand, I feel like there's so many games that come out, and back when I was mostly playing video games, like a long game was 40 hours, and then you have these long games that come out now. You're talking about Elden Ring and some like Persona 5, right? You're talking about like 160 hours, 200 hours to really complete the thing. It's just like it's insane, and there's a zillion more games too and options that you have. So I kind of do the same thing. When I started getting back into games, it was like I had this list of like, oh, here's all the games I want to beat, and it would give me anxiety because I would start playing a game and be halfway through it and be like, when am I ever going to beat this game? How am I going to get to the other ones? And
Yeah.
stop enjoying the one that you're actually with in the moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, the first thing that was interesting that you said is like the when long games were 40 hours. What games were you playing? Because like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and 6 were like 100-hour games. So I'm not sure
Were
what
they?
games you
I
were
thought
playing,
Final
but
Fantasy VII is like 40
clearly
just
they're
to
the
complete
wrong ones.
it.
Like, yeah, if you don't go do all the things, it can be 40 hours. But like, what's the point? Like, go to do all the things, get all the summons, go
I don't
get
know.
all the
I'd have to look at it.
materia, go.
In my mind, Final Fantasy VII with all the side quests is like 40 hours. But
It's
maybe
not.
I'm
I
wrong
think
and remembering
it's
wrong.
I think it's closer to 60 hours, and I think that's if you're like not actually reading any of the text, right? So yeah, my experience was different with those games. But especially like is Final Fantasy 8, I probably spent 40 hours in the card game, Triple Triad.
Mm. Well, that one for sure. That one has like just a ridiculous amount of side quests
Yeah, and
and
then
all that
Final
kind of
Fantasy
stuff.
10, I spent like at least 30 to 40 hours on Blitzball. Like I
Mm.
find I get a lot more enjoyment out of the mini games
Hmm.
than the actual game. Like, and with The Witcher, like I played so much fucking Gwent. Like I
Yeah.
only cared about the like getting Gwent cards in in The Witcher, and more so than anything than any of the actual hunting
Yeah.
monsters. Like that was fine. I just want to be good at Gwent, and that was fun.
Yeah. Have you played any of the? Because they created an actual spin-off Gwent game. Have you played any of
I
that at all?
didn't because I think it was a mobile game, and I think it was like you can pay for cards, and like any
Mm.
games like that are really bad for me because of like I have a very addictive personality. So like it's really easy for me to blow thousands of dollars to get the cards that I want. So I have to
Got
be very careful with the games that I play.
it. So no pay to win entries for you.
No, because I've gotten
That
in
doesn't.
trouble with those before.
Yeah, that would not be fun. What was I thinking? There's something about Gwent. I think. Forgot. Let's see. Oh well, let's talk about like hating things. So one of the things that has been kind of like a signature for you, at least that I've noticed, is how much you enjoy, it seems like, and how kind of funny and entertaining you are with hating things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
See, like I would love to talk about it, but I don't know because I'm just experiencing the thing and letting my thoughts out on the thing and not understanding why people like this thing that is objectively terrible. And that's like that for me, that's the extent of it. And clearly, people really enjoy my experience of that. But I don't know that there's anything that I'm like, I'm not trying to specifically do something when I do it. Like, I'm just kind
Hmm.
of watching the thing, like experiencing it, and just not comprehending what anybody is getting out of that. And then, so that's it's enjoyable for me to analyze and express my thoughts on things, but it's not like that.
Hmm.
I don't enjoy hating some things. Some things are just really, really fun to hate. Like,
Hmm.
it's really fun to hate the rival for your sports team. Like, it's really, really
Hmm.
enjoyable to do that. It's fun to expend energy, um, just fucking hating things, right? But not in hating things into where it's like it's a all consuming way. It's just like I'm just expressing this thing and like getting this thing out in a very fun and spiteful way. It's very unique.
Hmm.
It's very unique kind of fun hate and not like a driving, vindictive, consuming hate, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, but Vampire Diaries fucking sucks, and I don't know why people ever watch it.
I haven't seen it myself yet, so I will take your word. And if anything, you have definitely made it a lot less likely that I will ever watch that show.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah. Do you have any? You mentioned obviously other sports teams, or are you in any particular sports, or do you have teams that you have a rival that you do hate, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I'm a very big football fan. I'm a 49ers, San Francisco 49ers fan because I was born in the North Bay.
Hmm.
And so we as the collective 49ers fans, objectively hate the Cowboys and the Seattle
Hmm.
Seahawks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am in Seattle now, so they become one of my like pseudo teams that I have. I mean, I grew up in LA before the Rams were there, and after the Rams were there, I guess. So I didn't really grow up with a
They're
team, so I
not
have
an
a little
LA
bit of
team.
Seahawks
Like
love.
the only actual LA football team are the Raiders. They were the only one. And then there's a lot of bullshit that happens there. But yeah, but nobody in LA is a fucking Rams fan anyways. Like LA are like the worst football fans.
There's a lot of
They're the
Rams fans, at
worst.
least from where I
There's
live,
not.
but I don't.
There is
I
not.
have no.
There's not.
I have no direct care about it. I'm a Lakers fan. They're one sports team that I care about at all. Are there any other particular things that you have loved to or currently like love to hate on besides other sports teams and Vampire Diaries?
It's very much an in the moment thing. That I know I'm not like seeking out like I love to do this thing, but I'm very in the moment. I'm going to hate this thing and really enjoy my because I could choose to like be upset about it, or I could choose to just fucking make fun of it and shit on it, and I'd much rather do that. So I'm still enjoying the experience, but the experience sucks. So yeah, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I have this like desire now to have like a show where I don't say like people you have friends or something who just like know what you would absolutely hate and just like have a podcast or a YouTube show where it's just like you just hating on things in video form in real time. I just think that would be a pretty entertaining show.
Yeah, I would be for that. I just don't want to have to do any of the I'm not like it's not interesting for me to do like let's find stuff that we're gonna hate
and I don't
or
think
do
it would.
anything.
I don't
Like
think
I
it would work
just
that way.
show up and like almost have me not know the thing that's gonna happen, and then just like watch it in real time and shit on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Amber and my wife and John, my friend, have often said it'd be great if we just had a camera on you a lot of the time. Like 90% of that would be boring, but 10% of that would be really, really hilarious.
Right. Yeah, I mean that would be kind of my idea. It's like if you had John and Amber and whoever else just be like go through their movie catalog and just be like, oh, he's gonna hate this one so much,
or
and
just like an experience. Like let's go to a club,
yeah.
and then let's find like no, this is terrible. Why are we here?
So funny. Awesome. Cool. One of the things I'd love to chat about is kind of going back to a lot of the nerd stuff. Is you are a big Dungeons and Dragons fan? How did you first get involved with Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, I've read the books for quite a long time. One of the first like fantasy series of books that I remember reading and starting, and also currently read, is the Dragonlance series. And yeah, so like just that kind of gave me the picture of what it would be like to exist in a world full of dragons. And ever since that, I've always been interested in Dungeons and Dragons, but I've never really had the opportunity to play it until recently. Like COVID really kind of ramped up things, and for a lot of people too, and enabled me to play Dungeons and Dragons online and start to do that, and I fucking love it. It's a lot of fun to build your character and kind of exist in that theater of the mind with it. Yeah, it's really fun. Have you ever played?
I have, but only. So I have very limited experience. I actually played with somebody who is on Critical Role. If you're familiar with them, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know if she's still on there or used to, and she's actually written like a book for Dungeons and Dragons. Now I don't know if it's a short story or a story or whatever, but she's done like a full published book with them. But I met her in LA when we were both actors, and yeah, and so I started talking to them. I was like, oh, this is something I've always wanted to do. So I got to play like a little story with her and somebody else who's like a really good DM, right? Is that the right term?
Yeah.
Dungeon Master. Yeah, and I had a blast because I was like, oh, I want to make my character like somebody who does like a bunch of drugs. And they're like, okay, well, there are these things that are kind of like mushrooms. These things are kind of like MDMA. I was like, all right, cool. Like I'll have my character did them. And I ended up taking them after like mushrooms, I think after a fight. And there was like a roll of like 100. And I landed on this thing where it was like some like magical unicorn appears out of nowhere and like takes me up. And I got like a huge like view of the land ahead of me. So I was aware of it, but obviously nobody else was, what we were kind of running into. But I also didn't get like I forget what it's called, but where you go to sleep and your skill points like replenish or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a blast. And then I also did the Star Wars one where it's like you roll. That one was I actually really liked that one. Have you played that one? You know what I'm talking about? I think it's called like
But
Dice of
yeah,
Destiny.
there's a lot of iterations of the mechanics and a lot of different fantasy lands. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine.
Yeah, well,
So
that one, what they did, what was interesting, I thought, was beyond simply like rolling the dice and being like, oh, like you hit this amount of points and like hurt this character, just roll for this thing. There was two different style of dice that we rolled. So one that was like this thing ended up as a success, and then the other thing that was like it had a positive or negative effect. So you could, for example, like roll that you like missed your shot, but the other hand, it like had this positive effect. So maybe it like ricocheted and hit like their lightsaber out of their hand on accident while you were, falling or whatever it
like
might
a
be. So
chance die.
it created some like really interesting storytelling components that were really fun to play. And that one was actually I got to do on a podcast, a couple of podcast episodes of. So that was really fun.
Yeah, it's cool when they introduce mechanics that enable storytelling. Because otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
like you could do that exact same thing with Dungeons and Dragons, but like you have to just tell that thing that happened. And
Yeah.
often like the way that they would do that in D&D is like the DM would have control of like he's rolling behind his like little fucking fortress that he sets himself up behind, so you can't see any of the rolls, right? And that's how that would happen in that game. So it's cool that there's a little bit more player agency for that kind of story in the Star Wars one.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah. It was a fun game. I guess with regards to Dungeons and Dragons, for somebody who wants to get into it at this point in whatever life they're in, I guess, like, do you have any tips or recommendations for, I don't say, like finding a group or finding people, whether it's in person or online, and being able to start playing? Because I know for myself, it's something I've always been like, oh, that's something I really want to do, but unless it's definitely something you have to have other people for, right? It's not like a video game that I can just pick up and just do whenever the fuck I want, or even an online game where I can go find people just instantaneously. Like, how do you end up like finding that kind of community, build that kind of community, and actually like build an ongoing game?
I got really lucky. Like some of my friends like happened to be like DMs, so it's easy to insert myself into that when you already have like a DMs that you know. From what I've seen, there are a lot of good Facebook groups that kind of enable that type of meet, especially for people online. And then just go to your local like game store. That is still a really good place to both meet people that share that kind of passion and find groups. It's a really good place to do that.
Cool. Any tips for like a beginning player?
Yeah, just enjoy it. You can't do anything wrong. Just have fun with it, and don't worry about the rules too much. Like people will explain it to you. Just like interact with the world, and you'll figure it out.
Cool.
It's
Awesome.
really easy to just like look at a rule book and like this is too much, but just like it'll assuming you have a good DM, it just won't matter. Just like create a fucking have an idea of what you like, what kind of thing you want to be, and people will help you be that thing and interact in the way that enables you to do that.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, and then I guess the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, do you have a new podcast that is probably be out by the time this episode comes out, called My Comical Bromance, co-hosting with John Romanello?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm curious. What has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, that experience has been pretty fun. Honestly, I was very nervous, like just starting it because one thing that I haven't done a good job of in my past has been talking, just in general. I tend to be very direct and I'm very quiet because I am very much a person who I will talk when I have something to say, not just talk to talk, right? So the podcast has been a unique experience in that obviously I'm there because I want to talk. And the thing that I've been most nervous about doing that is like because John is somebody who talks a lot because he enjoys talking, and not like in a bad way. He likes to talk about things,
Yeah.
and so my worry was just him kind of having the burden of carrying a lot of the episodes, and so far that hasn't been true. And that's been really nice.
Nice. Cool. Is there anything that you have, I'll say, learned about yourself from the podcast, either from doing it or just from your other guests and things you've talked about?
That is a good question. I guess I've learned more that I've learned that I have more that I can say if I want to. Yeah, and I've learned that. Yeah, if, I need to do a better job of pulling it out, but I do have a lot of things to say that seem to be worthwhile to hear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've definitely enjoyed this conversation so far, and listening to your different views and opinions. So yeah, definitely. I'm glad to
I
hear
appreciate
that.
that. I have a lot of them. They're just like randomly. They're not. The ADHD doesn't organize them very well, so when and where they come out, and just like it's hard to predict.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Do you feel like, because the words that you use, if I remember correctly, were that you realized you have a lot more to say if you actually want to say them?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So I guess I maybe reframe the question in a way that because I don't know how to answer that other than to say that
Sure.
exact same thing back to you, right? Because
Sure.
like, yes, I will. If I want to say something, then I will say it. Otherwise, I just won't.
Sure. So I guess the better way to ask that question would be something to the extent of like, what you said that you were like, you actually have a lot more to say than kind of maybe you originally thought or felt like you did. And that you have a lot more to say and have things that people care to hear about, that
Mm-hmm.
you kind of want to be expressing, that you realize you can talk about these things if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my question to that is there something, I don't know, that was happening before, or a belief that you had maybe that, like, that shifted for you, or that your voice didn't matter, or that you were upset people, or maybe something of that nature?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's a really good question. And from what I've kind of gathered, just like piecing my past together, just my experience as being somebody with autism and just kind of existing and saying things that aren't quite always maybe the right thing to say or the right time to say them, and just kind of like dealing with a lot of little instances of those, just like really built up over an entire childhood and past. Has really in the past had really shut me down and kind of like off in terms of how I communicate, because often the way that I communicated was, wrong
Hmm.
for whatever situation I was in. So I just wouldn't, if I didn't have something specific to say about a thing, then I just wouldn't say anything at all.
Hmm.
And like really over the past couple of years and now kind of with the podcast, I have slowly been shedding that.
Cool. Cool. So from what I just heard, it's like you kind of grew up in the environment that you were in, and basically speaking, sharing what your thoughts or opinions or whatever it might be caused problems, which you kind of like hinted at with the Navy experience, right? Where it's like you
Yeah.
pissed a lot of people off, and maybe didn't make things super easy for you. And I mean, honestly, I know I used to work for a neuroscience company, and I remember our head neuroscientist talking about that was a pretty challenging situation, not just for people who maybe start with autism, but for just intelligent kids growing up, because they can often feel very out of place because they are smarter than the adults around them or than other people around them at a very young age, and yet they don't have sort of the authority to be for it to be okay for them to be smart, if you will.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it sounds like you probably dealt with a lot of that as well. It sounds like, at least within the Navy, and probably in other aspects of your life as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, yeah. And it's often, yeah, that's just often the case. And then, and a lot of times what I had to say, people often didn't want to hear.
Hmm.
Again, at the time, timing is a real big thing with autism.
Hmm.
It's just like, cause there's like a convention or a like unwritten rule around a lot of things that I'm just completely unaware of. And so I just don't do the things, and I do
Yeah.
exactly what is just in my brain and it immediately comes out. Yeah.
Have you for that kind of thing now, do you have like kind of like a check-in system? Like if there's something that you want to say that
No,
you're
I
like,
just
man,
say
this
it.
you just say it.
Yeah.
Just go through it. Got it.
Yeah, like
Uh,
because I like what I've learned is like people's reaction to the thing that I have to say is not really my problem.
hmm,
As long as I'm not being a dick, like it doesn't really matter. Like people are going to have a any kind of reaction one way or another, and there's no way I can control that. So I just
yeah.
yeah.
Uh, so that's, I guess, an interesting question you made me think of right there is like, how do you, especially kind of with yourself, like saying like, hey, it's difficult for me to, I say like see myself or see how my actions are affecting people. How do you decipher when you're being and actually being a dick versus when you're just, expressing yourself and it's kind of perceived that way, if you will?
I mean, it's really easy to analyze the thing that I said to the person and like know what was like. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe it was like that's they just didn't want to hear that, and like
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes, it just. I mean, it's I have a very clear like right and wrong compass. So it's very easy for me to know as long as I'm staying true to what I believe in. And then like I'm not always super concerned if somebody just doesn't want to hear something.
Mhm.
But I will if I say something that I was like that I shouldn't have said that, then I will absolutely go like apologize. But like it happens like everybody does, right?
Yeah.
I just have more instances of saying something that people don't want to hear more so than me saying something I shouldn't have said.
Yeah. Got it. With regards to that moral compass that you have, and I'm guessing on some level like developed, because you weren't raised like religious or anything of that nature, right?
No,
No.
no, not at all. There was no outside influenced structure as in how I was raised, other than my parents trying their best.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, how did you, I want to say, develop such a strong inner compass? Like, how did you end up putting that together and developing it through yourself? Was it just through like analyzing the world and figuring stuff out? Was it like, how did you kind of go about developing that?
I mean, that's a really good question that I don't really have a large answer to, other than I've just always kind of have known what I thought was right or wrong
Mm,
in most situations. And that's just kind of been intrinsic for me for as long as I can remember. And that just like doing research, that does seem to be like a component of people with autism and
mm,
autistic people. They have a very strong sense of morality and how it relates to them.
yeah. Cool. Cool. And then something else you've been really vocal about. Is it cool if I ask you a couple questions about depression and dealing with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it's
So,
not. Never.
well, yeah, you posted about it enough online that I figured
Yeah,
it would be
exactly.
okay.
I don't give a
Yeah.
fuck.
Yeah. Well, how is that? This is going to be a very broad question, so feel free to take it
Oh
in
boy.
ways you'd like, or ask me to be more specific. But how does depression show up for you, and how is that impacted and affected your life?
How does it show up for me? I mean, that's a good question. For me, I guess trying to figure out because it's very multifaceted, but it's also very it's like one of those things, right? It mostly shows up for me as overwhelming thoughts of wanting to kill myself,
Hmm.
and just a deep sadness and not understanding where it comes from, right? There usually is a reason behind anything that you feel. And if I can't figure that out, then that's usually an indication that it's a depressive episode.
Hey, thank you for sharing that. And I think that that's something I'd love to also dig into a little bit more, because one of the things that I have learned from honestly you and John sharing about it so vulnerably has been uh, that aspect, right? The aspect of like out of nowhere, this kind of like just dark, really dark cloud can just hit you. It's not necessarily coming from a place or a specific event or anything like that. It's all of a sudden this cloud kind of takes you on. And my experience of it from the outside looking in is like it can be really, really frustrating for you as somebody who maybe struggles with depression, because people can be like, oh, like, well, just do this or change this thing or change that thing or go exercise or have you looked at this? And there can be a lot of like, I'll say misunderstanding of that, or trying to use some sort of personal growth tool to fix it versus being able to say, hey, like this is an actual thing that this person deals with in the same way that you might deal with a, I don't know, like a peg leg or something, or you have some sort of physical malady in the same way.
Yeah, it's interesting, and like a lot of the things that people suggest on how to deal with what they would see as depression are really good ways to deal with not being sad anymore. And that's not the same thing, right? It's not like I'm sad, it's that I have an overwhelming despair, and the only way that I can think of to get rid of it is to end my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not being sad. Like sad is easy, and there's an easy link on to the reason that you're experiencing sadness, and it's either going to go away or it's fixable, right? It's not the same as depression, in which there can be an inciting event for it, and it can also just be like, hey, today it's Wednesday, therefore this week you're going to be depressed. I'm like, cool, thanks, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not super clear in when it's going to happen all the time.
Yeah. What are some of the things, or maybe one thing in particular, that you wish people who don't struggle with depression understood about it?
I wish people understood that it's not something that we want to be fixed in the moment. Like people that are depressed in general, from my experience, just talking to those people, they know that they are in depression, and what they're not looking for is how to fix the thing, because we know that it can't be fixed. It just needs to be kind of tolerated until it's gone. And the best way to do that is generally proximity support without trying to cheer somebody up, because that often is seen as a dismissal and not as helpful.
Got it. When you say proximity support, you mean somebody physically being there with you?
Yep. And just not really, like, you can be more than happy to talk about the depression, but not like, hey, let's go cheer you up. Hey, you want to go out and do this thing? You want to go out and do the fuck? No, I don't want to go do this thing. I can't. Because I'm going to be out there, and the only thing I can think of is like, oh, I wonder how I can like run into this oncoming car instead of doing this thing. I'm like, that's not. No, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. What, and you just mentioned like somebody being basically sitting there with you, but is there anything else that, like, I don't say like a friend of somebody who's depressed, or a lover or that kind of thing, somebody who, if we have somebody that's depressed in our life, that any tips or tools for them on how they can better show up for their friends?
Yeah, just understanding like what you're trying to do when you show up for this person during this thing. Often in my experience, it's people are trying to show up for the person who is depressed so that they can move them through that episode as quickly as possible, so they don't have to experience that person's depression with themselves as well. They want to fix the problem so that everybody is like happy again, not because they want the person. They want to help or comfort or be with the person who is currently experiencing depression, and that's not very helpful. And often people think that like, yeah, I'm just trying to help you through it. Like, no, what you're trying to do is help yourself through it, so you now don't have to be in this shitty experience anymore. And that makes it way worse, just so much worse. Yeah, just understand it's not something that needs to be fixed or solved or anything. It's just something that needs to be acknowledged, and you can talk about it and kind of like just kind of help get language around expressing it. And that's it. That's usually the most that you can do.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that I found that I remember correctly about you talking about Amber, and one of the ways that she supports you really well is she will, like you said, kind of hold space for you and be able to be with you in what you're on, but she'll also communicate, if she doesn't have the capacity to. in that moment, right? And being able to be like, hey, she's in awareness of her own self, to be able to be like, hey, I'm not going to be able to show up for you effectively in this moment, rather than trying to kind of put on a face or force herself to do it when it's not working for her.
Yeah, again, and that's something that we've had to work on and figure out, because often she was trying to fix the thing because of her, like, and I don't want to speak for her, or kind of like, I don't want to speak for her at all, but often when I was experiencing depression, it was also the specific trigger for her for a lot of her past stuff. So she wanted this experience to move through as quickly as possible, and not to actually be helpful in a way that I needed, but she wanted to be helpful in a way that she needed. Right. And like, that's something that we had to learn and kind of deal with. And then once we got there, it's been so much better.
That's awesome. Two sort of booking questions with that is, one, are there any signs, or maybe if you want to give just kind of a description, like can you tell when you're starting to go in towards a depressive episode, or is it suddenly you're just
Sometimes.
kind of like, oh fuck? Got it.
Yeah, sometimes. But it's like, it's not something that it's like, oh, here are these 3 things that I often do when this thing happens. It's like, oh, it's weird that I'm feeling this way all of a sudden. And then I'll just kind of like sit with that, and it's like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Or maybe it's not, like maybe I'm just fucking tired, right? Like, it's often hard to tell. But the more that I kind of sit with the depression and kind of like sit in it and not try to escape it or fix it, the more awareness that I'm able to get around it, and the earlier I'm able to kind of detect when it's going to come. And sometimes, like, the more awareness that I have with it, the more I'm able to express the things and put names on things, the quicker it can go too.
Yeah. And then sort of with the opposite end, when you are starting to come out of it, like, how does, say, like, for lack of a better question, like, how does that feel, or what is the experience of like coming out of depression like? Is it suddenly you're kind of like, oh, it's been a while and I haven't been depressed, and you just kind of realize that, or is it you can kind of feel it like opening up? Or?
How would you feel if at one moment all of your thoughts are occupied on how you could end your life, and then all of a sudden that no longer exists? It feels pretty good.
Yeah. Right. So it is kind of like an almost all of a sudden thing in that way.
Yeah, there's like a tiny bit of like a ramp down from that, but it's sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I'm done with this now. That's nice.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing all that. I think that's,
of course, it's very easy for me to talk about for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's good and helpful. I feel like there's not really a lot of, often a lot of good conversation around those kinds of things. And I think, particularly as somebody who's, kind of been involved in various aspects with like the mental health, or not the mental health world, but the personal growth space, it's a lot of those conditions get eschewed in a way that are not helpful or supportive for
What do you
a
mean?
lot of people. Like, a lot of people, I would say, like, oh, it's like you have depression. Well, you're not actually depressed. You actually just have this thing, or you just need to do this, or you need to use this trick, or you need to X, Y, or Z, or like you just have this belief system about it, versus being like, hey, like you.
Oh yeah. It's, you have this narrative in your head. Like, yeah, the narrative in my head is I want to kill myself. That's right. Actually the full narrative. So like, I'm not sure what you're trying to get out of me from here, but I would just like not to have that narrative anymore. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, that's a being sad versus being depressed kind of discussion.
Right.
And it's easy for people who have never experienced it to say those things because they don't have any idea what it's like. I mean, like, I can't describe, like, you just don't, if you've never had it, you just don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, it just, it's not something that you can even like describe to somebody.
And then I guess that leads me into this next part. Was one of the ways that you at least expressed to me that you had dealt with your depression was you did, I believe, 30 grams of mushrooms in a single.
I think it was somewhere between 25 and 30.
So that is by far the most amount of mushrooms I've ever heard anybody do at least once in one session.
Mhm.
Yeah. How did you even get to that like moment? What was that experience like?
I mean, the getting to the moment was basically John asking me, "Hey, you want to go do this thing?" And me saying, "Yeah." I was in a very long like battle with depression at that point, and I knew that I needed to do something to fix it, and nothing that I was like doing was like helping or working or anything. So I just needed something, and like when that opportunity arose, I jumped on it. And as far as why so many, like during the ceremony, they kept offering me more, so I kept eating more. Because like the thing with mushrooms, as far as I can understand about ceremonies like that, it's the more you take, the deeper into the thing that you go. And I wanted to go as deep as possible for that setting, so I can try to like relieve some of the just constant pain and sadness that I was feeling.
And just a disclaimer for anybody out there, we do not necessarily recommend that you go and do 30 grams of mushrooms. Chris was with
Definitely not by yourself.
yeah, Chris was definitely with a guide and under some good supervision and that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
be careful. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else that you want to share from that experience and what that was like? I mean, did you have kind of just like the world disappear and then come back up, or like were you just revisiting old experiences? Like, what was that uh, experience like for you?
So there's a lot of different like kinds of mushroom experiences you can have. Often the way that's not like so. I don't remember a lot about the like my highest dose mushroom ceremonies. I don't remember a lot other than feeling a sense of some sort of relief when I was finished with them. I know that the people around me said that I was definitely going through some some stuff. Obviously, that's why I was there. But as far as any specifics that I took out of it are relatively non-existent, and from what I understand, that has a lot to do with just basically however your brain is processing whatever you're going through. And a lot of that is like you just need to be unconscious to do this kind of work, and that is definitely the how I felt coming out of those experiences. Yeah.
Cool. Any tips or advice for somebody who's looking to, I'll say, do some inner work through psychedelics or mushrooms or anything of that nature?
Tips. Assuming that you have a place that you can go to go do the thing, make sure that you are going into it with a sense of wanting to experience what you're going to experience. But I would suggest not setting hyper specific intentions around the thing that you're going to do, because it's often not up to what you think it is. Like, right, you're thinking about the thing that you think that you want to deal with, and like maybe it's actually has nothing to do with what you're actually dealing with. And as often as my experience is, the mushrooms will show you the thing that you're supposed to be dealing with, and you'll work on that. So yeah, frame it in a way that's like, I'm going to embrace this experience and whatever it's going to be, and then you're going to have the time that you're supposed to have. I'm not going to say it's going to be good or bad. It's just going to be the time that you're supposed to have.
Got it. Cool. Thank you. Well, Chris, this has been a really, really awesome conversation. We went in a lot of different directions here, and I really appreciate your time. Where can people find out more about you or follow you or whatever?
If you want to, you can find out more about me on Instagram. I am at the Chris Coulson, because I'm the only one. And that's the primary means of interacting with me as of right now. I also have my website, nerdswholeft.com, and my podcast with John, which hopefully is coming out as you're listening to this.
Cool. And that's called the
My Chemical Bromance podcast.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Chris. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure, and I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.